Okay, welcome back. We're talking about the three women who worked in the Trump administration, all 20-something white women who were dedicated Republicans. I don't know if they were conservative or not, but they were dedicated Republicans, which I don't understand how they had that particular political mindset, but that's who they were. And after working with Trump and seeing what kind of a monster he actually was and was capable of doing to this country, to our democratic republic, they decided that they had had enough, especially after the 2020 election and what Trump was screaming and farting and wheezing about regarding that election, that it was fraudulent, that it had been stolen from him, blah, blah, blah. So all three of these women were interviewed, Alyssa, Griffin, Sarah Matthews, and of course, Cassidy Hutchinson, all three of whom had worked in the Trump administration. Now, Hutchinson, as you know, she was the top aide to Mark Meadows, who was the Orange Antichrist's last chief of staff. And she's the one who stood by Trump, Hutchinson did, the longest after the 2020 election. And she said in this interview that there's a large portion of the population that's not recognizing their mistakes, that are not working to continue to better our country. Now, there's a lot of room to be a cynic where it concerns Cassidy Hutchinson's conversion, you might say. What took her so long? But on the other hand, coming into the daylight finally is better than staying in the darkness forever, right? Anyway, Hutchinson said on this interview with Jonathan Karl, quote, there's a fundamental, she said, this is a fundamental election to continue to safeguard our institutions and our constitutional republic. We are extremely fragile as a country, and so is the democratic experiment. Now, what she's talking about, of course, is the election coming up, the one that the orange bastard and his Nazi followers are convinced they're going to win. Now, this is the first time that all three of these women, Griffin, Matthews, and Hutchinson, and by the way, they all cooperated with the House J6 committee, the select committee that investigated the Capitol attack. This is the first time they gathered to share their experiences. Now, Griffin, Alyssa Griffin, who had resigned from her White House post on December 4th, 2020, she sat for a private closed-door interview with the J6 committee. While Sarah Matthews, the former White House Deputy Press Secretary, she resigned on January 6, 2021, and Cassidy Hutchinson, who left the White House at the end of the Trump presidency, testified publicly. You remember those televised hearings, in addition to the closed-door testimony that she gave to the J6 committee. And it's my understanding that these women were willing to do this. Well, they came to the conclusion, I would assume, on their own, or with whoever advises them on issues of decency and morality and ethical conduct. But they had lengthy interviews off the record with with Liz Cheney prior to their testimony before the J6 committee. And I'm sure that testimony, or conversations, I should call it, the conversations that these three women had individually with Liz Cheney had an effect on their determination to finally come out of the darkness and into the light and tell what they had seen in front of the J6 committee. Most transcripts of the J6 committee closed-door witness interviews were eventually published. Whether or not these will be I don't know who it's up to. But the testimony from Hutchinson actually played a major role in the House investigation, the one that we all witnessed on television, because she provided detailed accounts of the Orange Antichrist frame of mind surrounding the 2020 election he lost, as well as the events before, during, and after the insurrection. She was there. She saw it all. And, of course, the Antichrist has denied any wrongdoing with regard to January 6th, Now, as to be expected, the orange bastard and his Nazi high command responded to ABC's interview with a statement calling these three women ungrateful grifters who, quote, used the opportunities given to them by President Trump, end quote, and had gone, quote, full Judas, end quote. Wow. Full Judas. Hutchinson, who was, at one time, believe it or not, regardless of what we saw during the televised hearings, she was a staunch Trump defender. And since then, she's become a frequent target of attacks by him and his Nazi high command since her testimony, of course, before the J6 committee. That's what happens when you speak the truth about Donald Trump. You become a grifter, a Judas, a bastard, a punk, a fat man, a skinny man, an ugly woman, a gruesome woman, whatever invective he can come up with. But Hutchinson said, quote, our singular focus needs to be, if he is the nominee, on making sure that he is not elected the president again next November, end quote. And they said even if it means electing a Democrat, God forbid, as president, which is a disappointing and unsettling thought for Miss Matthews, who, as I pointed out, has long been a Republican. She made no secret of that fact when Jonathan Karl talked to her. And Matthews was a former deputy press secretary. She told Jonathan Karl in an interview yesterday, she said, quote, I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, but I think that in this next election, I would put policy aside and choose democracy, end quote. She said she's still hopeful that Trump can be defeated in the Republican primary, but that the clock is ticking. Yeah, no kidding. And again, this is what I don't understand. How can somebody like Sarah Matthews, the former White House deputy press secretary, who one assumes, given the nature of that job, has an intellect, has curiosity, is intelligent, unless it, now I understand, wait, understand, a deputy or any White House press secretary is supposed to speak as the president's voice when called upon to do so. Press secretaries are not known for, nor would they ever be, independent thought or contradiction against their employer, the President of the United States. Still, I find it so hard to believe that Sarah Matthews, given what I assume is her education level, her intelligence, how she ever could have supported this bastard. And Cassidy Hutchinson the same. How does that happen? How do people get so brainwashed that they will accept someone as foul and filthy, especially if it's a woman, somebody as foul and as filthy as Donald Trump? Anyway, given the fact that the Orange Antichrist has made retribution against anyone and everyone who ever hurt him or took away his presidency or said mean things about him. Retribution is a major theme of his reelection campaign because of that. These three women, Hutchinson, Matthews, and Griffin, they've already faced harassment from Trump and his Nazi high command. And as a result of the interview they gave with Jonathan Karl yesterday, they say they're very much aware and fear the consequences if he rises to power again. Ms. Griffin said this, quote, what scares me as much as Trump and his threat of retribution is the almost cult-like following he has over his most diehard supporters. The threats, she went on, the harassment, the death threats that you get when he targets you, and he's deliberate in his targeting, is really horrifying and has no place in our American discourse, end quote. Well, no, it doesn't, Miss Griffin. It definitely does not. Now, Alyssa Griffin was the former White House communications director. So I am assuming that she has above average political awareness, if not political intelligence. And for these three women to come out now, okay, like I said, better late than never. But Miss Matthews added this, and she's talking about her fellow Republicans here. She said, quote, a lot of these people won't come forward, even if privately they'll acknowledge that Trump is unfit, or will privately acknowledge that the 2020 election wasn't stolen. And it's because they know that they will face death threats, that their families will face death threats, end quote, which is what is happening by their own admission to these three women. And when she got to that point of talking about so-called Republicans, and she's referring mostly to men who had total information and knowledge of what was going on, and especially the crew around him now, the men who are so goddamn soulless, cowardly, little subhuman gnomes, these little bastards around Trump. All of them, all of the Trump apologists, all of the Trump Nazi high command, all of them, they know what he did. They know what he's going to do if he's elected again, and still they don't say anything. And the reason is not necessarily because they're cowardly, although they're that, but because they are full-blown American Nazis. They hate democracy. They are Christian Nazis, with one or two horrific exceptions. But these are people who have taken, the men who have taken the Christian religion and turned it into something that stinks, that is rotting. And they present this as real Christianity, and they present Trump as almost the brother of Jesus Christ. And as Matthews pointed out, there's so many people who follow this in a cult-like way. They don't stop to think. They cannot think. Once you become embroiled in a cult, once you become committed to that cult, your ability to think independently or rationally is gone. Period. End of it. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.